Welcome back to day 28 of our chess journey to 1500 ELO on chess.com. Let's jump on into our game and see who our opponent's going to be today. So after yesterday's draw, we are still sitting at 1388 ELO, and today we have Utito0308 from presumably Russia. This is our first time facing this kind of an opening, and here we would have to decide on our setup, I think. We could just go on ahead and grab the center here, which I think we'll go on ahead and do. Let's play our knight out. I'm unfamiliar with this setup, but you know what works against most things? What I'm thinking of right now is a London-esque setup. I want to blunt this bishop along this diagonal, which is why I want our bishop out before playing e6. We might not create a full-on London setup, but we will probably go on ahead and play this e6 move. This should probably disallow our opponent from playing this e4 move, as we should have pretty decent center control. They play their knight out, and I think I'm curious as to whether this move is good or not. I'm thinking because it's blocking their pawn, which they might have wanted to use to hit our pawn here on d5. And here I'm thinking of grabbing space. First I'm curious about whether a6 is a good move here or not, or alternatively castling. I think we will just go on ahead and finish our castle first. And because this is not a threat because of this move and they can't drop back, so we will play a more aggressive bishop move going up here. They might play their knight like this, in which case I think we might just drop back and kick it out. We see a d4. Now I'm kind of conflicted as to the a6 move here. Do we have time to play it? I think we should, so we don't get knocked back by this knight. Our opponent is still far from developed, but now they are preparing to castle. I'm thinking here this bishop move might have been a slight mistake, as we might have had to play c5 to be as accurate as possible, so that if they capture we don't waste another tempo moving our bishop. But first, before we do anything else, we'll just castle our king here to be as solid as possible. And then I think we want to move our c-pawn up. This I think we'll just play the move we looked at and probably grab the bishop here, which I wouldn't mind. This is probably not an option. They capture. I'll just double check that we didn't miss anything here. I think they just gave us the bishop pair, which I'm quite happy with. It also gets our queen off the first rank, so we get closer to connecting our rooks. And here I'm looking at c5. We could play our knight out like this, but I'm not really liking those squares here. Alternatively, we might have this idea. Sorry, like this. Going to c4 perhaps. But I think we might just go ahead and develop our our knight rather behind our pawn here. The good thing here is they can't defend with their c-pawn. They take, then we take. They might jump in with their knight here eventually. This seems like a good outpost, but currently it won't work for them, as we would just capture and win a pawn. Our opponent seems to be playing for an e4. Let's have a look here. If we develop our knight, what happens if they push? Captures, captures. They might have the option of playing this move. How about this? If they take with the knight, then I'm not quite happy. So I think we'll go ahead and pressure this pawn with our knight here. Ideally I was looking at forcing their queen to capture, so we might go on ahead and win this pawn perhaps. And now we are at a critical phase here where there is a lot of tension in the center, and all of the pieces are looking at everything here. They capture and we will go on ahead and recapture, I think. So which moves could our opponent play here? I'm still quite happy this knight is currently on c3, as it's blocking this pawn, which is awkward to defend as well. And they can't play any c4, hitting our d5 pawn here. I'm looking at this weak pawn here as well, but this is not an option as of yet. I am considering knight to d4, however, hitting this weakness here, and maybe forcing our opponent's knight off the board, after which we could perhaps capture with our bishop and stare down at this knight here. And then if they move, we will win this pawn, and if they don't, it's going to be difficult to defend this knight. They proceed to push e4 as we talked about, and I think here our opponent is likely to recapture with the knight. This would fork our queen and bishop. What would happen if we played bishop takes? Then once they capture with their knight, we capture like this. Hitting their knight, I suspect they would capture, and then we probably... I think we would win a pawn at the end of the line here. This seems quite optimistic. Just want to make sure I calculated correctly here and didn't miss anything. This is awkward because of this move. But what happens if we just capture, they capture, we capture, and then once they capture here, this would just be a transposition into what we looked at, I guess. And I think this wins a pawn. So let's go on ahead and capture. They might move this knight. What would we do if they move the knight? I don't think we could hold on to this pawn. We could probably just... Let's consider our opponent's knight moves here. This doesn't do a whole lot. They capture like this, okay? And we capture, and we go into the line we looked at. And here I'm hoping I didn't miss anything. This, and I'm not seeing a very powerful response here. I think they would probably play like this, and then we grab this pawn here, and we defend our bishop as well by doing so. Now they have split pawns. I'm looking at moves like this, for example, but I don't think it does a whole lot. If they play that move, it might be an awkward move to deal with. Let's see, rook to c4, and then they drop back. Okay. I think this might be a mistake, as it's a bit slow, I think. And as I think our opponent is seeking to open up this diagonal, which is the only thing I'm really seeing that move might accomplish. So which rook do we want to bring into the game here? I think f to d8, because this other file might be occupied by our other rook. I'm just going to have to make sure we don't have any other tactics here. But as I'm not seeing any, we will probably not spend too much time here. And we'll just be happy, I think, we got our pawn advantage. Here we get a tempo hitting their queen and grabbing the open file. I think if they hit our queen here, we should probably capture their queen first, and they would have to. I think they would have to respond to this move, to be honest. They want to trade queens on their terms. Let's consider our options here. The move I'm currently looking at is this greedy move, bishop captures a3, because whichever piece hits us in response, we will be able to recapture. But then I'm looking at this response hitting our bishop, and I'm not seeing a good response to that move. So let's have a look at alternatives here. Queen to c3 doesn't quite work. We have to deal with the b file problems here. I think we might as well just trade queens and play b5, and then infiltrate through the d file here, hitting their pawns. We can't hit this knight yet, but we might be able to in the long term. This move would also threaten this pawn, so we'll just have to keep our eyes on that move and make a mental note of this. b5 is likely going to happen. I'll just have to make sure we don't have any better options here, but I'm not seeing any. We do still have 8.5 minutes in what's approaching an endgame situation, so I'll make sure to spend a bit more time here. We could play this slow move, rook to d7. simply because we would be preparing to double our rooks while simultaneously defending this pawn. And then our opponent could move their knight here. This doesn't quite work. I think I like this move. I'm not seeing any good forwards knight moves, so they can't generate a threat with this knight, but they might move it away more defensively to open up their bishop. I think our rook activity will be pretty good soon, after we double up here. And it might become difficult for our opponent to make good progress in this position. Instead of playing b5, we might also look at a b6 move instead, just locking our bishop into the game here in a really powerful position, controlling everything and defending our pawn chain. Even if we play a5 here, then this bishop would become a monster. I want to get our pawns off of these light squares here, so their bishop won't target them, but I don't think it's our first priority. Anyways, we'll have to deal with this knight being here, because it will always be hit by this bishop. So which moves could our opponent go for here? I'm not seeing a whole lot, but they could try to double up on this b file perhaps. If they leave the a file, rook to e1. I'm not seeing our opponent's idea here just yet. At first glance, this move doesn't do a whole lot, but it probably seeks to develop the rook like this perhaps. Rook to e4, as this is targeted and hit by our knight. So what happens after rook e4 and our rook moving to d8 here? They still can't hit this, so they might go this, like this. I'm not seeing what they would do here either. Then we would just play b5 at long last, and then I think we would be happy with our position. I want to make sure we don't have a powerful move with our bishop, but we can't really hit a whole lot. I was looking at this move previously, but then they could just pin us. So let's play this first. We might see this move, but then we would take their pawn, which might mean our opponent might look for an eventual a4 to get out of our bishop scope here. But this pawn would get closer to our other pieces. We will also have to consider our opponent's options of moving their bishop to other diagonals, but this doesn't work quite yet, and this diagonal does not have a lot of prospects. So our opponent seems to want to move this rook, which is what this move I think seeks to accomplish, as we mentioned here, allowing their rook to move so it doesn't have to defend this pawn. But now what I'm currently looking at is bishop to b4. First of all, we would hit this rook, and then we would be able to lock our bishop in on our pawn here on a5. Alternatively, we might have this move. And if we have a trade, I'm not really liking that position, as I prefer having a completely outside pass pawn. We also have to consider their options of pushing this pawn if we put our bishop here. We can't move our rooks to either square here as their knight is controlling them. And if we move our own knight, for example here, to move to this square or here perhaps, then they do have the option of hitting us like this, for example, which would be a fork on our pawn and our rook. And then we would have to move our pieces in an awkward way to deal with that problem. Let's go on ahead and put our bishop up here. This might not be the most accurate move, but it's the move I'm finding right now. And once their rook here moves off this rank, the first rank here, we might even consider this. But they move to defend their pawn. And in this position, I'm looking at this move. But it doesn't do a whole lot. This move seems to seek to push this pawn here. Essentially forcing our bishop back. I think I want to play a5, locking our opponent's pawn onto this square, so we will have the dark squares for our pawns. And if we are met with this move, we can drop back and get our ideal pawn structure here, I think. This is a bit slow, but I think we should be happy with the following position, I think. C3 is probably on the way. And we just drop back as we plan to, not wasting too much time. And once we get this pawn off of b7, we can move our knight. We could also do this in another order, but then our knight is currently doing an important job of controlling those two squares for our opponent's knight as well. But now with this pawn push, we can infiltrate this square on d3 without being hit by their knight. So our opponent might come to regret their decision, but we will have to see in the long term. We still have the idea here of infiltrating, going backwards like this, because of this weak pawn that can't be moved right now. b6 is still an idea. But considering our opponent's last move, I think we might want to try to grab this pawn here. We might not have to rush though. I'm thinking because we don't want to leave ourselves with weaknesses in different lines, and as we are up a pawn, I think we have the option of playing a bit slow and remove any weaknesses. We do have the activity still. I think most of our pieces are optimized in terms of positioning. It's just this knight that's not doing it. It's not playing to its full potential right now. This move, I think, does very little, as this pawn can't really be dislodged. What happens here once we hit this pawn? They don't have any incredibly powerful knight moves, but they might look to hit our rook in one way or another. They can't straight off the bat though, which is why I'm considering this, because our knight here seems to be hanging to this bishop. But this knight can't generate an immediate threat by moving, so our knight is still allowed to stay here, I think. Now I think our game plan is probably just going to be gobbling up those weaknesses here on the queen side and trading off material to get to a winning endgame. I've long been looking at playing the move f6 to take away the e5 square from our opponent's knight, but it would currently hang the e6 pawn. So currently I think our opponent has got 3 candidate moves, namely defending this pawn with the rooks here. They go for this move. And now I think we could use a tempo to move our knight to a better square. Ideally I think I would like our knight to stay here, but I don't think that works. This doesn't do much. This loses our knight, so I think we will go on ahead and move here. What happens if they go here then? I'm not all that happy with that position. How about moving this rook up here first? Simply defending our knight and forcing our opponent to make a move here, which might not be the best way of playing this, but we'll have to see. This rook move also defends this pawn, so now we can probably play f6 and remove this incredibly powerful knight move from our opponent's repertoire here, or rather their options. They play a waiting move, namely h4, and here I think we could expand. I think this is the time to play f6. This might be a long-term weakening move, but considering the current tactical position we are in, I think the position probably calls for this move. I might be wrong though, but then we'll have to look into the game review afterwards and get a look at that following position, or analysis rather. This knight still hasn't moved, meaning our opponent's bishop has still not been an active piece in the game, but it's still a dormant piece threatening this diagonal. Finally they open up their bishop. And here I think we might have this move. But first of all, I'm looking at knight to e5, as this square is open to us now. This probably allows us to play our knight up here, where it will be a threat, I think. That's my reasoning at least. And now it won't be hit by their bishop. It also restricts their knight, so it's going to be difficult to get it back into the game. This might have been a too passive move, but we took away a lot of good squares for their knight. So in opening up their bishop, they might have weakened themselves a bit much. Currently the move I'm looking at now is this move. This is pinned, so they can't move their pawn up. And if they move like this, I think we just win a pawn. Let's play quickly. They might look at this move. They play this, which I think is a mistake because we just capture and end up a pawn up. Or 2 pawns in total at least. Because we were already a full pawn up. And if they capture here, we fork their rook and king. And this is going to be a pretty good game for us to try to convert, being we are up 2 pawns and an exchange. I'm currently looking at this move, forking the c3 pawn and the g3 pawn. I'm not seeing any powerful threats here. This should win a pawn. Or at least force a pair of rooks off the board. We might have had this, which might have been better, or even this. Honestly, our opponent could probably just move this rook and we can't capture the pawn because of our opponent's king, I'm noticing. So this might not have been a good move, but then we just take this pawn afterwards perhaps. Or we could just play this move. I'm not liking how we are creating counterplay for our opponent by letting their rook move, so I want to threaten their rook. We still have a massive advantage here, so we are allowed to make a few slight mistakes as long as we don't lose material. We don't want to look to play mistakes though. This move here would allow us to simplify perhaps. This, and this. But then we have an outside passed pawn, and I think I'm liking the following position. I think here we do have e5 as well, actually. Saving this pawn, and our opponent can't defend this pawn, I think. They lose their bishop. I looked at that move, but it was covered by our rook, so I didn't think they would play it. Luckily they did, and now this should be a trivial position. I don't think I could blunder this endgame. Thanks for the game. I can't play you again now, though. I see we made no mistakes here yet though, but the game analysis might say otherwise. Anyways, thanks a lot for the game, Utito0308. Let's have a look at our accuracies. We played with 88.7 and our opponent played with 81.0, so this was a pretty solid game from both players. Now let's go through the moves here. Apparently we played theory moves until our opponent was the first one to move. Apparently A3 was not the move to go for here. Sorry, I'm trying to bring the analysis bar here, evaluation bar rather. We should have apparently grabbed the center, which is typical in those kinds of positions here, but this is a bit easier to play with, I think. This was a mistake. And the critical line here might have been this knight move. No, it was e4. This would have been strong here. And if we captured, then they would have gone like this. And they would have not had this fork. Apparently they would have had this fork because they would have sacked a pawn to get us to compromise our king safety. This doesn't seem all that human because they sacrifice a pawn and they either lose a second pawn here perhaps or mess up their pawn structure even further, while our king could probably just play e7 and we would get our rook into the activity very early on. Well, our opponent proceeded to make a mistake and we played a few more normal moves and then they gave us the bishop here for some reason. This c5 move was apparently best here. We should have moved our rook to d8. I guess once we capture here, or they capture, this is going to be an open file, so to some degree it makes sense. And then our other rook might have belonged on the c file after this pawn would have been removed. Well, we captured here and we got into this position. This was apparently not the best move. They wanted us to capture with our bishop here. What I was looking at in the game here was this move, but afterwards here I'm noticing we could have captured their queen. And then we could just have moved to safety and been up another pawn. This was apparently not the best move. Bishop to f8, going all the way back, was apparently best. Well, either way, we captured and moved our rooks onto the open file. The game preferred this move. What would have happened if they pushed the pawn? Oh, we would have had a fork. So this would have had to be met with rook to f1 is the top engine choice. No human would have played that move, but a move like this, for example, could have been played. We took this square instead and moved our pawn up. And in this position, the engine wanted us to play our knight back first, but we went like this and jumped our knight in here. In this position, however, we had a couple of incredibly powerful moves. I was looking at this, but then I thought, oh no, we lost our knight. But no, we didn't. We didn't quite do so, and we would have had this move first as well, and then we could have picked up their bishop. So this would have been decisively winning. This was still quite winning, however, especially after this mistake by our opponent. And here we made a couple of moves. This was apparently best, followed by this. It does confuse me how those moves were the best ones, but I guess after this continuation we get control over those two files here, which makes sense. We should have checked here. And from this point on, the game was going to be pretty trivial. while our opponent blundered and resigned the game, and we got a win today. So now we are almost back up to 1400 ELO, with plus 10 netting us 1398 today. Well, that's our game for today, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye bye!